Mr. Becker, are you ready to give your opening statement?
I'm here.
All right, you may proceed.
Thank you. Good morning once again. Single gunshot wound right to the back of the head. That's what killed Patrick Lyoya on a cold, wet, rainy day back in April 2022. It's almost in the middle, maybe a little bit below the middle. You have an opportunity to see it, I think. But that single gunshot wound is what killed him that day. It's not just me saying that. You're going to hear from Dr. Stephen Cole. He's our medical examiner, and he's going to say he can determine that because when a bullet is fired, a gun is fired, the bullet comes out, that puff of smoke, and that puff of smoke contains some gunshot residue. Now, from far away, you're not going to get gunshot residue on anything, but if it's a close shot within a few feet, you're going to be able to tell unless that gun, that barrel of the gun, was in contact or near contact with the back of the head of the individual. And he's going to tell you it was a contact or near contact wound, that gunshot wound that killed Patrick. The barrel of the gun was on the back of the head. Now, it's not just you have to rely on his testimony about that either. You have an opportunity to see the video. You'll see the video where the defendant who sits before you here today fired that shot. It's on a cell phone video. So to some extent, your job is somewhat easy because you're going to have more video and access to different videos than just about any jury that's ever been around. You'll have a cell phone video. You'll have a body camera video. You'll have an in-car video. You'll have a security camera video from across the street. You'll see different versions of the video in terms of freeze framing videos. You'll have an opportunity to see everything and break this down video by video. One of the troopers, Zach Batchelor, he synchronized these videos. So you have all the videos together when you go to deliberate this case. You have to watch this over and over again, probably more than you wish to. But it's an important piece of evidence. But that's not the only evidence because, as I said, there's evidence that comes from the stand as well. And we'll call witnesses. And it starts out fairly simple because we're going to start on David McCurry. He was a friend of Patrick's. He was, Patrick spent the night at his apartment before he left that morning and died. Dave's going to tell you he was hanging out with Patrick. Patrick and him had gone back. They're both African immigrants. They had been together for a few years. They know each other. He spent the night. Ame Tushimi is the other person that was at the apartment. I think him and David were actually roommates at the time. And Ame is the one who actually took the cell phone video that morning. David says, yes, they hung out, they're drinking, having a good time, nothing special, just kind of hanging out like guys do. And so that morning, he had to wake Patrick up. Patrick had told him the night before he slept on the couch, hey, wake me up, I gotta leave by before 8 o'clock, I got something to do. Now there's another individual, Mark. David doesn't remember him, Ame does, kind of says, yeah, we had to take him to his house, or had to take him to work, but just before 8 o'clock, he was gonna say, yep, we woke him up, Patrick's gotta leave, he left with Ame, they get in Patrick's car and take off. Now, May's going to tell you, yeah, there was this guy, Mark, we dropped him off at his house, and then we went to see Patrick's own place. Patrick had his own apartment, so they went to Patrick's apartment to kind of check it out. He had just gotten it, he was kind of excited about it. So they looked at Patrick's apartment, and then they proceeded to leave again, and were driving around. They're going to hear they stopped at like a Walgreens and got some beer. They got some beer, and then they got back in the car and were driving around. Now, from May's perspective, he's the passenger. Patrick's driving his car, sitting in the passenger seat. He's all of a sudden notices there's noises. There's noises going on in the car. The car is making a noise. This isn't like this is an old Nissan Altima or something like that. It's not a great car. So there's noises, and Patrick comments like, what's going on? There's noises, and Patrick pulls over the side of the road. He gets out. Now, May's kind of at this point in time, not really paying a whole lot of attention. He's on his phone. But you're going to find out at that point in time, the defendant, as a Grand Rapids police officer, had pulled him over, was in the process of pulling him over. Now, from a lot of what you're going to get now is coming from the actual body cam, the body cam that's on the officer. Okay? They've got, it's on, I think it's on his chest, essentially. It's activated when the overhead lights go on. So at the time Patrick's pulling over, the officers turn on his lights, and Patrick gets out of the car. And you're going to see this interaction between the officer and Patrick at that point in time. Patrick's like, what did I do? And the officer says, get back in the car. The defendant says, get back in the car. What did I do? Now you're going to notice at that point in time that Patrick's first language is Swahili. And there's a definite accent. So the defendant, do you speak English? Patrick says, yes. But the plate doesn't match the car. And that's true. You're going to see evidence that the plate belonged to a Ford Fiesta. This was a Nissan Altima, so the plate did not match the car. Do you have your driver's license? I need your driver's license. Yes, I have one. Patrick opens the door. looks in, and Ame's in there, and Ame doesn't remember a whole lot, but they look, apparently maybe tries to open the glove compartment box. You can kind of see that from the video. Opens the glove compartment box and looks in there, but there's no driver's license. So Patrick shuts the door. Now they're standing in the road, it's a residential area, and Patrick starts to just simply walk away. The defendant grabs him and says, nope, 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 you're under arrest, and Patrick breaks free. Breaks free, kind of does a spin move, and then runs around the back of the car. You'll see this on the video, on the body cam video, and runs around the car. He's wearing flip-flops, and his pants are falling down, and it's kind of raining, and he runs, he gets all the way to the driveway that the cars are parked, maybe 5 yards, 10 yards at most away. It's like a 6-second chase. The defendant tackles him from behind, takes him down, and then there's a struggle. There's a wrestling match going on at that point in time. The defendant's telling him, stop resisting, stop resisting. Patrick is then trying to get out. Now you're going to hear from Wayne Butler. Wayne Butler is the homeowner where the driveway where this initial tackle takes place. This is a residential area. He's going to say it's kind of unusual for a car to get pulled over in a residential area. It's surrounded by Kalamazoo and some busier streets. And he's kind of, that's kind of weird to see a car getting pulled over there. So he actually goes out. You'll actually see him on the cell phone video now, because at this point in time, Ame realizes what's going on, and he gets out of the car and starts videotaping on his cell phone. So you have a combination of something that's going on a body cam, you get some from the in-car video, you also have the body cam. But you have Wayne's testimony, and he's probably the one that sees it the most in terms of going for the whole thing. So he comes out, and you'll hear him in the video. He's trying to talk Patrick down. Hey, I'm a black man too. I'm a black man. You gotta calm down. Don't reach out to Ame. Ame, hey, tell him to calm down. This is a bad situation. Patrick doesn't listen. Patrick, you see him push himself up, and then he walks. He walks with the defendant holding on. He walks essentially across the front yard into the yard of Fred Hunter. Now, Fred's a homeowner too. He notices he doesn't have a ton to add, quite frankly, to all this, but he was there, and we're going to call him as a witness to give his impressions. He heard the struggle, he heard something about a taser, he heard, they heard the gunshot go off, but he's kind of in his house and not paying a ton of attention, but you'll hear what he did have to hear and see that day. So what happens there is then the defendant and Patrick are kind of standing. They're standing essentially in front of Fred's front door. And they're standing in front of that front door, and Patrick kind of is, struggling and spins out of it. So then they're facing each other. The defendant's got one arm on Patrick and one arm, and he decides to bring his taser. Now this is a demonstration of the taser. This is what a taser, this is the taser, it's a taser 7. You're going to hear about that. But this is the kind of taser he was using. You actually have the opportunity to see the taser. So he brings that taser out and is going to try and tase Patrick. Patrick grabs the weapon. You'll see, this is from the body cam, grabs the taser, grabs his hand and moves it. Moves it out of the way. The taser discharges. And that's an important piece of evidence right there. The taser discharged the first time. There's no impact. There's nothing, he's not tased. It goes into nowhere. So then the struggle's about the taser. Let go of the taser, drop the taser. You'll hear that repeatedly. There's a number of commands that you'll hear that repeatedly. Patrick goes down, they both go down. They both go down the front yard of Fred's residence. It's raining, it's slippery, the grass is wet, and they struggle. Now Mae's watching this, and you'll hear from Mae. He's probably intoxicated. He's kind of mumbling things. He's not really comprehending what's going on, but he's watching. He's holding the cell phone, and it kind of dips up and down. But you'll watch what happens then. They're struggling. You drop the taser, drop the taser. The defendant ends up on Patrick's back. Patrick once again tries to lift up. He starts to lift up and lifts the defendant off. The feet's off the ground, but the defendant's able to regain control, get back down, and kind of shoves him down. But then he transitions to his firearm. He transitions to a firearm, puts the gun to the back of his head, and shoots him. Patrick collapses almost instantly. He's lying there on the ground. So a lot of what you're going to hear about is regarding this taser. This taser, it looks like it, but it's not a gun. It is not a gun. It's a less lethal weapon. I think in the Grand Rapids the policies and procedures, it's something that's called an electronic control device. That's how it's defined. It's put up there with a device how you control people. Pepper spray, batons. It's not a gun. Even in the taser training manual, it says it's an option that doesn't replace lethal force. So you're going to hear from Brian Childs. Brian Childs is from Axon. Axon is the company that makes the taser. And he's going to tell you what the taser was designed to be less lethal. It's designed to be safely and deployed in a less lethal way. It's been deployed almost 5.5 million times. The amount of time it causes some sort of serious injury, I think it's like 99.7% of the time, it does not cause death or serious bodily injury when it's deployed. It's something that can be dangerous, no question, but that's not what it's designed to do. Now he's going to kind of alleviate some of the things that people think a taser does. Some people think a taser knocks you out. And you see it on TV, somebody gets tased, boom, they knock out, and they're out for 15 minutes. It doesn't do that. That's in TV, this is not in movies. What a taser does is cause neuromuscular incapacitation, NMI. You'll hear about that. The best way to put it, I'm probably putting it wrong, but that's why you have Brian Childs, he's the engineer, he's the expert, he's going to say it kind of seizes up the muscles, causes the muscles to seize, and so a person can't necessarily operate it, and cause them to be able to function appropriately when it seizes those muscles. So it's only in place, that NMI is only in place for the time was an electrical charge. That charge there, as soon as you release it, the person's kind of released from that. It doesn't cause any ongoing damage. It's not something that somebody is just withering on the ground for. You're going to see from the taser, they compare it to, what the taser company compares it to is after you're being tased, it's like strenuous exercise. That's one of the things in the video, or the PowerPoint you're going to see on the taser training PowerPoint. It's like comparable to being strenuous exercise. It's designed not to kill. It's designed not to hurt. It doesn't electrocute you. The amount of electricity is something that combined to like a Christmas tree light. It's not a huge amount. And it doesn't always work. That's another thing, because one of the things you have to do for a taser to work is there's two prongs that are shot out, and those prongs have to have sufficient space. You'll see from the video that's got to be about 12 inches. 12 inches is about the minimum amount to get that neuromuscular incapacitation. Anything less, it may cause pain, but it's not going to incapacitate somebody. Right? So it's got to be an appropriate spread. If it doesn't get the appropriate spread, somebody may not suffer from any consequences. If it gets caught in somebody's clothes, it may not work. So one of the training things, you be prepared for it not to work. But they say, just part of the training video, you'll see it says, just like anything, you got to be prepared to transition to something else because it may not work. It may be not something that has an impact when you try and use it because of the variabilities, if you will. Now, one of the things you also hear is that when somebody is using a taser, when it goes in, there's a possibility of death or great bodily harm. And they list some of the things that happen. They list that if somebody's tased, they freeze up and they fall in concrete, hit their head. That's one of the things you got to be careful of. If you're around flammable materials, you got to be careful on that. That's something you got to be careful of because electricity could cause it to explode. Pregnant women, there's certain things that you got to be careful of. There's certain target areas. You'll hear about the target areas of the front. The back is actually the best way. The back and splitting the belt line, if you will, is the best way to get for somebody to be tased. The front, not so much, but you can use it in the front. So you got to be careful with it, and it could cause it. But the whole idea of a taser is that's a safe and effective way to do something from a distance. You can use it at close range. You'll see that. But close range defined by taser is about 4 feet, not an arm's length. 4 feet is characterized as close range under the taser policy. They can go almost up to 12 feet because it's designed to give them some space so you don't get into situations like this one. So Brian Child is going to tell you just about everything you know about the taser and how it is designed to be a safe and effective means of apprehending somebody. But you're also going to hear then in terms of what happens in terms of these defensive tactics. Because defensive things, that's one of the things we're going to hear about from our two police practices experts. Police practices and defensive tactics experts. Because they're going to give you an interpretation, they're going to tell you a little bit more because we're not police officers, but they're going to give you an impression. Seth Stoughton and Nicholas Bloomfield are our two police practices and defensive tactics experts. Seth is maybe more like a practices part. He used to be a police officer. He was a police officer down in the state of Florida for a number of years. And I think we talked all about changing jobs, and he had the idea to change a job and become something else. He became a law professor. He teaches at the University of South Carolina. He teaches criminal justice, criminal procedure. He teaches policing to future law students, people who are going to law school. He also goes over to the undergrad and teaches their criminology department. Now you'll hear all his credentials. He works for the American Law Institute. He's written books. He's written law review articles. These are articles in University of Virginia Law Review, University of Minnesota. He goes into different law reviews and researches this topic, presents all these ideas and stuff because that's what he does for a living. He studies police use of force issues. Nick is maybe the more hands-on individual. He's was a police officer until 2022. I believe he still serves in the reserves and down in New Mexico, where he's from. And he's more the hands-on. He's done defensive training, defensive tactics. He's written policies on how to use defensive things that the police officers have. You're going to hear about. There's different things. A gun is a defensive weapon, a taser, a pepper spray, a baton, all these things that police officers have and use, as well as training on pressure point tactics, hand tactics, stuff like that. It's the hands-on. He has done trainings for this in the state of New Mexico. He's reviewed over 200 different use of force incidents in that state and with his department and other things. That's what he does, the hands-on stuff. So one of the things, kind of summarizing, and it's not going to be, it's going to be long. They're going to provide quite a bit of testimony. What they're going to talk about is when they look, how does a police officer, how should a police officer look at a use of force? And they break it down. Does the individual, the person who the force was used against by the police officer, does the individual pose an imminent threat to the police officer? Imminent threat, immediate threat. Is there some sort of imminent threat that that person poses to the police officer? And that's how you determine that. Well, they got to look at three things: intent, ability, and opportunity. Those are the three things. Does that person have the intent to do something? Does they have the ability to do something? Do they have an opportunity to do something to the police officer that would mandate some sort of use of force? What it boils down to is when you look at this case, I think you're going to look at this case and that Patrick had an intent to get away. There's an intent to get away, but that's not an intent to do great death or great bodily harm, which would allow the use of deadly force. He had an intent to get away. One of the other things is that he didn't have the ability, because you hear about when you watch the videos, the taser was deployed twice. You have the initial deployment, it was you hear it fire when Patrick grabbed it and moved away. When it was deployed a second time, when the two of them are on the ground, you're going to hear and see the video that they're on the ground, they're struggling, and then the guy goes, let go of the tape, and there's a pop. Let go of the tape, and he moves away. So the taser was deployed a second time. Brian Childs will tell you that. He says this taser was deployed on 2 separate occasions. So the prongs that cause the neuromuscular incapacitation were gone. They couldn't be fired again. You can't necessarily reload them because there's wires. You can't just put those back in. So the ability to cause NMI was gone at that point in time. Now the one thing that was left is there is something that's called a drive stun. A drive stun where you take essentially the end of it and you could drive it in, make contact. The drive stun does not cause NMI. The drive stun is a pain compliance device and it causes pain, but the drive stun itself does not cause any sort of great bodily harm. It may cause some injuries where the prongs hit or something like that, but it doesn't cause any sort of great bodily harm by the drive stun. And Brian will tell you that. So when you're looking at that, when our 2 experts say it, well, the ability of Patrick to do anything was not there because he couldn't shoot the taser had been shot, the drive stun doesn't cause, so there was no intent, there was no ability to cause any sort of harm to the officer. But they also take a look at the officer. The officer's perspective, you kind of take a look at the officer, is a reasonable officer, is a reasonably intelligent officer, and then who's prudent in same or similar circumstances. Would that officer anticipate needing to use force, the force against the person? And you look at all the facts and circumstances, because that's what you gotta do. Reasonableness and all the facts and circumstances presented to the officer at the time. A reasonable officer in that situation would not think death was going to happen, would not think the use of deadly force was necessary, because that's what it's gotta be. It's gotta be necessary. Police officers can arrest. That's not the issue. Here. We're not saying he shouldn't have been arrested. Patrick committed crimes. There's no question about that. He committed the crime. He was driving without a license plate. He didn't have a driver's license. He resisted arrest. He pulled away. You're going to also find out that he was probably drunk driving too, because his blood alcohol level was like a 3.0 at the autopsy. Okay, so he was drunk driving. So it's not an issue of if the defendant had the right to arrest him. The issue becomes, did he have to shoot him? Did he have to kill him in the course of trying to arrest him? I think when you look at all the evidence and look at the you come to a conclusion, the answer is no. Because what the judges just said, I have to prove things. I break it down into 4 things. I have to prove there's a death. That's your checklist. Was there a death here? Well, that's 100% certain. There's a death. Patrick's dead right now. I have to show that the death was caused by the defendant. That's 100%, no question in your mind. He shot him in the back of the head. The third thing, there's three different areas. There was an intent to kill. When you put a gun to somebody's back of the head, there's an intent to kill there. So those are the three things, are 100% you, there's no question. What your issue is and what this trial is about and why you have to decide is that fourth thing or third thing. Was it justified? Was it excused? Or was it lessened to some other crime? When you talk about justified, there's a legitimate good reason for it. Excused as well, we'll give it, yeah, you did all this, but no, it's okay, you're gonna need to pass. When you take a look at that, when you put all this together, take a look at all the evidence, you have to say it was not justified. It was unreasonable. Patrick never had an intent to do any harm to the defendant. He never intended to kill him. The evidence is going to show he never wanted to do anything other than get away that day. And even if somehow he did, he didn't have the ability to cause any great bodily harm because that taser was not going to do anything. So what this boils down to is it was unjustified and unreasonable. It was a crime. It was a crime here. The defendant committed the crime of murder. A police officer can't commit murder. They're no different than anybody else. They're no different than any citizen. They can commit murder, and that is what happened back in April of 2022. The defendant committed the crime of murder, and you listen to all the proofs, and you go back and deliberate. We're going to ask that you return a verdict of guilty to second-degree murder. Thank you.
And Ms. Hamilton, would you like to give your opening now or wait until later?
Now, Your Honor.
All right, you may proceed.
Good morning. I'm Michaela Hamilton, and it's my privilege to represent Christoper Schurr. Let go of the taser. Let go of the taser. Drop the taser. Those are the final commands that Officer Schurr gave to Mr. Lyoya before he was forced to make a decision he hoped never to have to make. What you'll learn from the evidence in this case and throughout this trial is this is not the murder case that the prosecution reports this to be. This case is about self-defense, which is, as the judge will explain, is a justification to murder. The prosecution will try to paint this as something it's not. They'll use words like excessive, unnecessary. They'll call Chris Schurr a murderer for doing the very job we asked him to do, for protecting the citizens of Grand Rapids and for protecting himself. And the evidence will show that this was not murder. This was self-defense. This is about a man who is doing his job as a peace officer, a man who took an oath to protect, to defend, to run towards danger when others run away. The evidence will show that Officer Christoper Schurr did everything he could to avoid using deadly force, even after being disarmed of his taser. He fought with Mr. Lyoya for over a minute to try to get his taser back. And you'll see he tries to turn it off. And when he couldn't, when he lost all control, he was forced to make a split-second decision, one he hoped never to have to make. He didn't choose to take a life. He chose to save his own. And we trust that after hearing all of the evidence, after hearing all of the facts, the evidence will show that Christoper Schurr is not guilty. He is not guilty of any crime and must be acquitted of all charges because he followed his training, he followed the law, and he did everything he had to do to survive. So, I want to take you back to that day, April 4th of 2022. It started as an ordinary day. 31-year-old Christoper Schurr woke up around 4 a.m., which wasn't unusual. Chris was used to working hard. He earned a full-time scholarship to Siena Heights University, and he was a 5-time All-American cross-country athlete. He was born and raised in Byron Center, where he met his high school sweetheart and now wife, Brandy, who is here with him today. Chris and Brandy were heavily involved in their church, frequently attending mission trips to Kenya, which is where they chose to get married. Chris and Brandy have always been devoted to helping others. So, around 4:30 on that Monday morning, and before going to work as a Grand Rapids police officer, Chris kissed his wife Brandy and their dog Arrow goodbye, telling them he loved them. And Chris arrived at the station around 5 a.m., roughly 30 minutes before his shift started. He always liked to get there early to make sure he was prepared for the day ahead. And when Chris put on his uniform, he became Officer Schurr. And that day, just like every other day, Officer Schurr had one job and one priority: to protect the people of Grand Rapids. He had no idea that within a few hours, he would end up in a fight for his life. Around 8 a.m. on that cold and rainy Monday morning, Officer Schurr was patrolling the southeast side of Grand Rapids. While driving down Kalamazoo Avenue, he noticed a Nissan Altima ahead of him driving unusually slow. And when he ran the license plate, it came back registered to a Ford Fiesta, not the Nissan Altima driving ahead of him. As soon as Officer Schurr realized the plates didn't match the car, he turned around and started following the car. And you'll see the video evidence, and the video will show that the car made 2 abrupt right turns, one right and another right. And you'll hear that that is a common sign to police officers that that person is potentially trying to evade arrest. And as soon as the car stops, before Officer Schurr is able to get out of the car, you'll see that Mr. Lyoya jumps out of the car immediately, instead of staying inside like everyone else does when they're pulled over. And because of that, Officer Schurr jumped out of his car and immediately commanded him to get back in the car, just like he's trained to do. But the driver failed to comply. And this is a common theme throughout this case, because Grand Rapids police officers are trained to consider failure to comply. Ask yourself why. As you'll hear, failure to comply with a police officer's lawful commands automatically escalates the situation, raises safety concerns, and creates a reasonable belief that this person could be a potential threat. Ask yourself, why was the plate registered to a different vehicle? Why did the car make 2 abrupt right turns? Why is the driver exiting after coming to a full stop? When Mr. Lyoya jumped out of the car, it signaled to Officer Schurr that this could become dangerous very quickly. But despite this, you'll see that Officer Schurr stays calm. He gives the driver the benefit of the doubt and continues with routine stop protocol, asking Mr. Lyoya for his license. But instead of cooperating, you'll see Mr. Lyoya evaded questions and demanded to know what he did wrong. Officer Schurr confirmed that Mr. Lyoya spoke English and calmly explained that the plates did match the car. Finally, after the 7th request for a driver's license, you'll see the driver pats his pockets. And then he says he has a license in the car. And he asks the passenger of the vehicle to get it. And you'll see that the passenger could produce a license. And then Mr. Lyoya abruptly shuts the door and starts walking away from Officer Schurr. Again, failure to comply. Ask yourself why. Why isn't the driver providing the license? Why did he shut the door and walk away? And you'll hear that officers are trained that when someone tries to distance themselves from a car, it could mean that there's contraband, weapons, or other items inside the car that they don't want the officer to see. All signals raised concerns from the start of the traffic stop. But once Mr. Lyoya failed to produce a license, Officer Schurr attempted to place him under arrest. He ordered Mr. Lyoya to put his hands behind his head so he could arrest him. But Mr. Lyoya continued to ignore his commands. And you will hear that Officer Schurr gave over 29 lawful commands. 29. Ladies and gentlemen, that's 29 chances that Mr. Lyoya had to change his outcome safely. Get this screen. And you'll see that Mr. Lyoya doesn't just ignore Officer Schurr's commands. He resists, he pushes, he shoves, he broke free, and he runs. And then you'll see that he fought and fought and fought. Mr. Lyoya continued to escalate the situation by failing to comply with Officer Schurr's lawful commands. He created a danger not only to Officer Schurr, but to the citizens of Grand Rapids. And like you heard, he was running towards two strangers' houses. He didn't know them. He was running towards their houses after he had just resisted arrest, after he had pushed an officer, after he had shoved an officer. Officer Schurr didn't know what he was going to do or who he could harm if he let him go. As Mr. Lyoya called for backup, as Mr. Lyoya ran away, Officer Schurr called for backup. And a short chase ensued, and Officer Schurr tackled him to the ground at a stranger's home, who you'll learn was Wayne Butler and Fred Hunter. Meanwhile, you see the passenger exit the car and start recording on his cell phone. And ladies and gentlemen, ask yourself what Officer Schurr knew about the passenger at this time. You'll see there's no interaction between them. He didn't know who the passenger was or why he was getting out of the car. He didn't know if he was armed. He didn't know if he would join the fight. Officer Schurr wrestled with Mr. Lyoya in the wet and slippery grass. And the struggle with Mr. Lyoya escalated quickly. Officer Schurr tried multiple physical maneuvers as he was trained, but nothing worked. Mr. Lyoya was overpowering, and he couldn't get him down. You'll see Mr. Lyoya was bigger than Officer Schurr. He was stronger than Officer Schurr, and he kept resisting. And you'll see Mr. Lyoya get up off the ground 3 times with Officer Schurr on his back. One of them, from a completed prone position on the ground, he does a push-up like it's nothing with Officer Schurr on his back. And you're going to hear that Mr. Lyoya had a blood alcohol content of 0.29, 4 times the legal limit, which would help explain why it was so hard to get him to stop resisting. You'll hear Mr. Lyoya yell to the passenger 3 times to get the keys. Officer Schurr called for backup again, expecting an emergency response. But no help came. He was left exhausted and alone. You'll hear him on the video, panting and wheezing for air. Throughout this entire encounter, Officer Schurr was following his training. He was following his training, he was following his policy. And after trying to get control of Mr. Lyoya to no avail, Officer Schurr had to move up to a higher level of force, since nothing else had worked. So he reached for another tool on his belt, the taser. A less lethal, not non-lethal, when in the hands of a trained police officer. A less lethal weapon. And you'll hear the taser can be converted to a deadly weapon, especially when used by an untrained person. And you'll hear all of the warnings that police officers are given. And you heard the prosecution talk about some of those warnings, some of those critical areas to avoid. Police officers are trained on how to use the taser to avoid causing serious bodily injury or death to people. But you will hear it is dangerous, it can cause serious bodily harm, and even death. When Officer Schurr drew the taser across his body, he aimed for Mr. Lyoya's back, exactly as he was trained. When suddenly Mr. Lyoya spun around and squared up to him, and in an instant, Officer Schurr was faced with the worst case scenario. Mr. Lyoya grabbed the taser, and once he grabbed it, you'll see he never let it go. And this is the moment that changed everything. Desperate and alone, still with no signs of backup, you'll hear that as soon as Mr. Lyoya grabbed the taser, Officer Schurr was flooded with fear because he knew what it felt like. It causes excruciating pain, incapacitation. It can drop an officer to the ground in seconds. But this fear wasn't just about the pain. This fear was about what could happen next. If Mr. Lyoya tased him, he could take his firearm and shoot him with his own weapon, which is something officers are trained to consider. If he went down, he would be defenseless, and his gun would be right there for the taking. And his training was clear. If someone takes your weapon, they'll use it against you. And despite what the prosecution tries to say, the taser, this is not a toy. You will hear it provides and delivers thousands of volts of electricity, causing your muscles to lock up, causing you to be incapacitated. You'll hear the taser can injure you in 3 different ways. As the prosecutor mentioned, neuromuscular incapacitation in probe mode. The drive stun causes extreme pain. And once the taser probes have been discharged, you'll hear that the taser wires can shock you. So not only is this weapon something that causes serious bodily injury, it can lead to potential death when used improperly. And the biggest risk to police officers is that once someone has your taser, if they use it against you, you will be left defenseless. And Mr. Lyoya had yet to comply with any of Officer Schurr's commands. And you'll hear that Mr. Lyoya never complied with one. And the evidence will show that Officer Schurr was unaware that the second cartridge had even been discharged. He didn't know it could only be used in drive stun mode. And frankly, it doesn't matter, because even in drive stun mode, the taser can cause serious bodily injury. The prosecution will try to downplay this. They'll try to say it's not that harmful.
You
It's
have to
not that.
object that she's arguing now, Your Honor, right? This is not for her to argue against my case, it's to present her case.
I would sustain that. You're being a little bit argumentative. Ms. Hamilton, tone it down a little bit. Thanks.
Throughout this trial, the evidence will show that the taser is a dangerous weapon that can cause serious bodily injury or death, period. The law doesn't ask an officer to wait until they're injured, incapacitated, or shot to act. And you'll hear from our experts and other police officers that officers are trained that action beats reaction. You will hear how quickly officers are trained, someone can turn on them and injure them with a weapon. It's faster than they can respond. And throughout this trial, the only question for you to answer is whether or not Officer Schurr's fear was reasonable. And the prosecution cannot meet its burden that it was unreasonable for Officer Schurr to be afraid of Mr. Lyoya after he disarmed him of his taser, gaining full control of it, trying to fight to get it back for over a minute. regardless of the mode. The moment that Mr. Lyoya grabbed the taser changed everything. With Officer Schurr's heart pounding, his only thought was clear. I have to get the taser back now so I can arrest him. For over a minute, he fought and fought and fought to get it back. He shouted, "Let go of the taser," again and again and again. Officer Schurr tried everything he could to stop it. He tried to turn it off, but Mr. Lyoya's hand blocked the safety. And then, when Officer Schurr looked down, he saw Mr. Lyoya holding the taser in his hand like a firearm. And he felt him getting up off the ground again with the taser in his hand, turning up towards him. And in that split second, he had to ask himself the most terrifying question someone can ever ask. Am I about to die? If he didn't act in that moment, he was afraid that he wouldn't make it home that night. So, Officer Schurr, completely out of breath, with no signs of backup on the way, with no other viable options, yelled out one final verbal command to drop the taser. And Mr. Lyoya failed to comply. Now, throughout this trial, as you're viewing all the evidence, ask yourself, why would Mr. Lyoya let go of the taser if he didn't plan to use it? Why would Mr. Lyoya switch it from his left to his right hand? And you'll see this in the video. Why would he do that if he didn't intend to use it? Why would he keep holding on to it after every command to let it go? Why was he holding it like a gun while getting up and turning towards Officer Schurr? The only question for you to decide is whether Officer Schurr's belief of danger in that moment was reasonable. And you'll hear from our experts, absolutely. It was reasonable. Throughout this trial, you'll hear from several experts. You'll hear about Officer Schurr's training as a Grand Rapids police officer. You'll hear how an exhausted officer would be after fighting for over 2.5 minutes. You'll hear why it would be reasonable for Officer Schurr not to hear the second cartridge go off when you're in the middle of a hand-to-hand fight with someone for over 2.5 minutes. What you hear is an eternity when you are fighting for your life. And you'll hear from several of our experts why Officer Schurr was justified in using deadly force. And you'll also hear from the people's experts, including from the taser manufacturer itself. And they'll attest that the taser can cause serious bodily injury or death when used improperly, especially by an untrained and unlicensed person. You'll also hear from the people's police practices experts, a law professor from South Carolina, who was a police officer 20 years ago. You'll also hear from their expert from New Mexico, a police officer from New Mexico. So when you hear from these experts, ask yourself, what are they
I'm going
wrong?
to check, Your Honor, she's arguing again in terms of commenting on our experts. That's not what she's proving, is what...
So I'll sustain that as well.
When you hear from all of the experts, consider what they're relying on. And at the end of the trial, the judge will instruct you on what the law is and what you must consider based on what Officer Schurr knew and how Officer Schurr was trained. And the law says that a police officer is allowed to use deadly force if he honestly and reasonably believes that he is in danger of serious bodily injury or death. And when you're answering that question, you must consider this from the perspective of of an ordinary and prudent person with the knowledge and in the situation of the arresting officer. So when you're considering all of the evidence, when you're hearing from all of the experts about police practices and the use of force, remember this. This is what you'll have to consider. What Officer Schurr knew, what he was trained. The law does not require perfection. It doesn't ask for hindsight. And when you're considering your verdict, you cannot sit here as a Monday morning quarterback from the safety of the jury box with unlimited time and hindsight. You're not here to judge what Officer Schurr should have or could have done. You're here to judge what he did in that split-second moment, based on what he knew, based on what he felt, based on his training and his experiences. Now, a man died, and that's a tragedy. But not every tragedy is a crime. And not every death means someone has to be penalized. And self-defense is not a crime. You'll see a lot of video evidence throughout this trial. And we'll go through that with you step by step. And there's a lot of information in the video that we will point out that you may not have seen from the first few watches. And as you watch the video, ask yourself whether or not Officer Schurr had a reasonable belief to be in fear of danger, of serious bodily injury or death. Ask yourself, did Patrick Lyoya disarm Officer Schurr of his taser? And did he eventually obtain full control of that taser? Ask yourself, did Officer Schurr try to get that taser back? And did he believe that the taser could cause him harm? And the evidence will show that Mr. Lyoya was driving a car with the wrong plates. There's no dispute that this was a lawful stop. And then he ignored over 29 lawful commands. 29. You'll see he pushed, shoved, resisted arrest, and then he fought and fought and fought. And then he attempted to disarm and did disarm Officer Schurr of his taser, an inherently dangerous weapon. And you'll hear, he was nearly 4 times the legal limit, unfazed by pain. So it's your job throughout this trial to decide whether Officer Schurr's belief that he was in danger was reasonable. And the prosecution, in this case, has the sole burden. They have the sole burden of proof. And the judge will talk to you a little bit more about this at the end of the trial. And it's the prosecution's burden to prove all of the elements of the crime, and also to prove that Officer Schurr was not justified, that he was not in fear. It's not our job to prove anything. It's not our job to convince you he was afraid. It's the prosecution's job to convince you that he was not afraid, that his belief was not reasonable, that it wasn't reasonable for him to be in fear after he was disarmed of his taser, after fighting for over 2.5 minutes. And after you see what Officer Schurr went through, after you hear from our experts, ask yourself, has the prosecution proven beyond one single reasonable doubt that this wasn't self-defense? Because if there's any doubt, the law is clear. In a criminal case where one's liberty is at stake, the Constitution demands something far more: proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So if there's even one doubt in your mind, you must find Officer Schurr not guilty. not guilty of all charges. And at the end of this trial, we trust that after hearing all of the evidence, you'll understand that this was not murder. This was survival. This was self-defense. And we'll trust that you will return the only verdict that reflects the truth. That Officer Schurr is not guilty of any crime and must be acquitted of all charges. Thank you.